Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a wild train ride when I put Tom Gries' Breakheart Pass against Geoff Murphy's Under Siege 2 Dark Territory. And this one was a fun one to get to. These are both, like I said, a wild train ride, very good action thriller. So let's just dive right on in to the nit and the picky. First up, we have Tom Gries' Breakheart Pass starring Charles Bronson. And this is like one of the crown jewels of Charles Bronson's run of action films in the 70s. The film itself kind of plays like an Agatha Christie novel, like on a train and stuff, you know, very, very Hitchcockian too in certain elements, you know, because especially Hitchcock had a huge hard on for trains too. But here we have Charles Bronson. He's like, in most of like the films that he does, he's always the most underestimated one and usually the smartest person in the film. And also at the same time, we never know exactly what the fuck he's gonna do or who the fuck he is, you know. And of course, the film itself boasts a bevy of great actors. I mean, you got Ben Johnson, Jill Ireland, Charles Durning, Richard Crenna, and Ed Lauter, who was the asshole guard in The Longest Yard. But the film centers around, you know, of course, a train, and it's a western too, very solid western. Tom Gries was one of his specialties was doing westerns, and he did do a few other Charles Bronson films. Most specifically, I believe Breakout is the name of the film. But you know, and the cinematography is just something special, you know, because like with the snow and then the fucking mountains and all the wide expanse and stuff, you really get a sense of the danger that is going on in this film, you know. And of course, what it is they're going to some army fort, and they find out on the way that there's some kind of virus there and stuff, and that, you know, it's all quarantined and stuff. And like Jill Ireland, she's there to go see her father and everything, but everybody else is kind of like a big government official. Like Ben Johnson's a big Indian fighter, and like Richard Crenna is a senator, and like we find out later that he's a real piece of shit because everybody in the film believes that Charles Bronson is like some outlaw, but turns out he's like a doctor. But then also turns out he's a federal, works for the Secret Service and stuff, and you know he's investigating the fucking corrupt senator and stuff. And you know, and as the film progresses, like people start dropping like flies in the train, and so that's when it fully turns into a mystery. You know, it's like a mystery western, if you will. And you know, of course, Charles Bronson is always one step ahead of everybody, and the action in this film is incredible too, because of course the stunt coordinator and second unit director was the great Yakima Canutt, who was one of the greatest stunt persons of all time. Like that dude, you know, basically revolutionized the stunt coordination and everything, and you know, from the early days of stunts in films. And you really feel the action, like the fights on top of the train, and even like when the motherfuckers fall from the fucking trusses and stuff, like you really get that sense of danger. It's almost breathtaking at how like well done this is. And of course there's a, you know, extraordinary shootout at the end of the film, you know. And you did a film that definitely delivers on all levels, because you definitely get the action, you definitely get the fucking thrills and the mystery and stuff, and you even get a little bit of comedy. The beauty of Charles Bronson is he knew his lane perfectly, and usually if he had a director like Tom Gries or Michael Winner or even J. Lee Thompson to a certain extent, they wouldn't try to make him do more than he should. You know, sometimes there'd be the occasional time, most of the time, you know, it had to do what Charles Bronson knew he could do, and you know, and somehow he was able to take that further, because like much like Clint Eastwood, the less that Charles Bronson says, the better, because he could tell more with just his eyes and his face than he could mouthing some fucking words that somebody wrote for him, you know. Because you know, even just saying something like hello is sinister coming from Charles Bronson, you know, one of the greatest screen presence of all time. And of course, like his love interest in the film is Jill Ireland, who was also his love interest in real life. They were together for quite a while until she died. And you know, the film, and also like, you know, of course Richard Crenna is always great at playing a fucking douche, and you know, everybody else in the film is playing their parts perfectly. There's nothing really out of place. But like I said, it is kind of like those Agatha Christie, like, you know, multi-character stories in a tight space trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. And it's definitely a thrill a minute, you know, all the way to the end, you know, especially with that incredible music by Jerry Goldsmith, who is one of the greatest composers of all time. And then we move forward to Geoff Murphy's Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, which of course is the sequel to the Steven Seagal film Under Siege. And Steven Seagal returns as Casey Ryback, but instead of being on a battle cruiser, he's now on a a fucking train. You know, his niece, played by a very young Katherine Heigl, her parents had just died in a plane crash, so they're taking the train to L.A. and he's trying to reconnect with his niece, who he hasn't seen in like 5 years. And you know, of course, he had bad blood with his brother, and so they're all trying to deal with that. And but then while all this shit's going on, in the film, the train ends up getting hijacked by Eric Borgersian, or however the fuck you say that dude's name, and with a whole team of mercenaries and all this shit, led by Everett McGill, who was always just a sinister looking sleazy motherfucker. You know, whether it's Heartbreak Ridge or The People Under the Stairs, this dude, just even his pugnacious face, you just know this motherfucker's up to no good. But they hijack the train because also on the train there's these two government people that know the code to this like satellite that can be used as a weapon that Borgesian had created for some government agency that's, you know, oversaw by Kurtwood Smith, of course, most famous for playing Red Foreman, also in the movie RoboCop. He was one of the great villains in movies. But the film itself, the actors in it are very mid. You know, like I'll say this, like Morris Chestnut and Katherine Heigl might be the best actors in the film. You know, Morris Chestnut plays a porter who kind of gets, you know, roped into all this stuff. You know, he ends up being the sidekick to Steven Seagal, because Steven Seagal as an action star was kind of mid. Like he didn't really, like his delivery was even lamer than Stallone's, because at least Stallone could throw some cool on it. You hear Steven Seagal try to be all quippy and badass, it is a little soft speaking ass. It doesn't come out as well, you know. And then dude can fight. Dude's got some hapkido or whatever the hell martial arts shit that dude knows. But the action itself is very mid, especially like when you have motherfuckers with machine guns and all they do is just shoot 100 bullets and stuff like the fucking A-Team. It doesn't really do anything for the action. And even the fact, like, they're going through some treacherous terrain as they're going, because the whole thing is they got like the satellite set up, they can keep going, and then nobody can track them, and all this shit's pretty genius. You know, of course, it's got the people that have the codes on there too that you need, and they torture them in a way that is like, you know, it's one of those movies that's very predictable. Much like Stallone, you knew Steven Seagal was gonna win; he wasn't gonna die. Other than executive decision, I don't think I've ever seen Steven Seagal die in a movie. And you know, like from the opening scene, that like, you know, whatever gets thrown at this dude, like he's gonna find a way to fucking put somebody in a chokehold or knock him out and shit. You know, even when he's hanging off of that cliff and he's fighting the dudes on the wire and stuff, like even to seeing the people fall down, you know, it's just like that whole, you can tell this shit is incredibly fake. Whereas opposed to like something like Breakheart Pass, that shit feels real. You know, we all know movies are bullshit, but some movies, especially in the 70s, had a way of making shit seem so realistic that you felt like you were actually there. Now with Under Siege 2, it feels more like a roller coaster ride than anything else. Like you feel something, but you know it's all bullshit. Everything's gonna be all right in the end and stuff. And it is, because like most of the fucking side characters, especially the mercenaries, you know, it's got some great character actors, like the late Peter Green, who we just recently lost. Like he does his thing, but he's even phoning it in. He's not even, compared to some of the villains that he's played in previous films, like it doesn't even hold a flickering birthday candle to that shit. As well as like fucking Everett McGill, who's like just in there phoning it in as well. Like his fight scene with fucking Steven Seagal is very like mid as, oh, he broke my goddamn coat. Like, you know, it's just fucking lame as hell. Now Borgeson does a good job at like chewing up the scenery. Like he was always a presence in movies, just like this sassy, sarcastic motherfucker that just like, you know, you want to punch in the face, but he's got such a smooth voice that you just want to listen to him just rattle ass. You know, it's really crazy. But like I said, everything all works out in the film, and it ends. And another thing too, like the music's very mid, and they like one of the things that a lot of like Warner Brothers films did, especially with their big action stars like Stallone and Steven Seagal, they would have some corny ass song at the end of the film that would like in a way be referencing what went on in the movie, but at the same time not have a fucking thing to do with it. It was like, you know, that kind of shit is fucking irksome. So this round clearly has to go to Breakheart Pass, because it's just, one, it's just a real ass movie. Two, Charles Bronson is a way better star and action person than fucking Steven Seagal ever dreamed of being. You know, I like fucking Bronson may not know all that goddamn karate bullshit, but like I guarantee he probably still could whoop Steven Seagal's ass. I put it to it. Even the ghost of Charles Bronson could probably whoop his ass. You know, and like I said, the side characters in Breakheart Pass are better. You know, they're not cartoons; they're real ass people. You know, of course, you know, like maybe like Richard Crenna and even Charles Durning, or they, you know, those guys will like ham it up as needed, but you still fucking feel it. Even somebody like Ben Johnson, you know, one of the few people, probably one of the only people to have a rodeo championship and an Academy Award. So like, think about that shit. Ben Johnson was a real ass cowboy that just ended up in movies and shit, and was actually a pretty good actor. You know, that happens sometimes, you know. So, like I said, this round goes to Breakheart Pass. For anybody keeping score, that is 67 to 53. 70s are up by 14 now. They are fucking smoking the 90s. Like, it's just one of those things. We get into the action films. It's kind of hit and miss because the 70s had some really great fucking action films. It might have not had like a million fucking explosions or shoot 1,000 bullets, you know, but it felt more realistic. You felt the sense of danger in the films, and they weren't fucking cartoons. You know, by the 90s, you know, the intellect had went down considerably. You know, you still had, in the 70s, you still had intelligent people going to the movies and wanting to see something, you know, maybe not necessarily original, but something that would, you know, be maybe thought-provoking, or at least like not insult their intelligence. By the 90s, didn't nobody give a fuck. Everybody was all numb, and they just wanted to, I just want to be entertained. I don't want to feel bad in the movies. You know, shit like that. And look where we are now. Now the fucking cinema is like clinging on for dear life. You know, you got motherfuckers, all they want to do is talk shit instead of make shit, you know. So, like I said, if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This is all open for debate. This is one asshole's opinion. You know, I'm just on a self-indulgent journey to figure out which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. And it's looking like the 70s. I may be right, man. They're up by 14. That lead continues to grow. You know, this has been a main event round. You know, we'll have more bonus rounds in the next, you know, few days as I have time to do them and stuff. And, you know, who knows, man? It could be a landslide, or it could be a fucking tie. Like I said, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there before I know. But the biggest takeaway is Charles Bronson might be the greatest action star of all time. Motherfucker did it for decades, did it with style and grace and very few words. So let that be a lesson to you. Less is always more.